Nailing the perfect marriage of story to gameplay is a science that many developers still struggle with today. BioShock has left an indelible mark on gaming narrative that can be seen and felt in many modern releases, but Irrational's motto remained from the beginning: don't start with the story, start with the gameplay. A lot of fans probably wonder about the process you go through in writing the story and the design for a game like BioShock. You've talked about how it evolves over time and what eventually ships is very different than your initial vision. Do you guys write like a script or a design document for the game and that becomes sort of the Bible that everyone drives towards, or do you iterate much more?
It's different for every game. Like System Shock 2, I went back to it recently. I wrote a design document, and we started that project in September, and the design document I saw was dated like October or something. So in a month, I wrote the design document, and it didn't change. A lot of it, got expanded upon, but the basic design really didn't change on that. Where on BioShock, I think it evolved in real time much more. We had a pretty substantial design shift, like a year before the ship date.
For BioShock?
BioShock, yeah. It got to be much more about the experience of being in Rapture than about being in your character sheet. And so the game evolved more towards that experiential kind of thing and making sure every idea was expressed in the world as well as just on your character sheet. So before you'd have a lot of things like, oh, I'm doing fire damage or electrical damage, but that was sort of a number flying off ahead versus, the whole notion of there's barrels and you light them on fire and then you can pick them up and throw them.
But you'd have stats coming off characters and all that stuff?
Much more so.
Oh, really?
And that evolved, we did a design shift, but I don't know how well that got documented. I think we were moving so fast that we were just sort of changing things, laying down the tracks as we went right ahead of us. And the same with the screenplay, the screenplay there is no screenplay. It's a bunch of probably Excel files and fragments of Word documents that I'd write it. I'd go to recording sessions and I'd rewrite on the fly once I hear the actor perform, because once the actor takes on it, you listen to their voice and you say, what you wrote doesn't really matter. What is the right thing for this actor playing this role to be saying? So I tend to do a lot of rewriting in the session. And then you have a bug late at night where somebody says, oh, this doesn't make any sense. And you're like, oh God, and you have to write a new audio log and try to get the actor back in. Or you figure out what's the best way to get this idea across? Yeah. And is it an audio log? Is it a poster on the wall? Is it a piece of text that pops up on the screen? And that's always dependent on how much time you have and what actor availability is. So, the plans sort of fall apart. I think we've worked on that a bunch since on the new project we're working on, where we are trying to document things a lot better and keep things a lot more logical, but the train was running so fast on BioShock that we just sort of...
early on, we got the Andrew Ryan scene in, like we'd said before, and that was kind of like the keystone. We're going to put a lot of work into this, so this can't change. Everything that happens before or after that don't really involve a lot of departments working together to make a scene, those things are very malleable, and if you need to change audio logs to represent a story, if you need to add lines or take away lines, that's very doable. And I think for a while we even had text-to-speech.
We even did that, I remember for Infinite with Booker and Elizabeth and all their dialogue, and that really didn't work very well, because you'd have these dramatic scenes and it'd be like, Elizabeth, we need to go to Comstock, and it just... Yeah. It almost had no value as far as I was concerned.
Atlas radioed on ahead. Says you were looking for an invite to the fisheries. Nuts, I say. But if your heads up to the Wharf Master's office and find old Peach a research camera, maybe I could manage an invite.
Ken has so much of, these games in his head, and you're sort of, you can keep it all straight, or try to, with all the different things and changes. But from the team perspective, Sean, because this is evolving and Ken's thinking in his head about how this all ties together, how does the team sort of keep up with, what the whole game is going to look like? There's
a lot of specifics that can change. For instance, Atlas used to have a Southern drawl. Right. And then we recast to the Irish.
And we actually cast an actor, wrote the lines, did the whole thing, and realized that people hated that character and distrusted him from the first start. So we had to rewrite him, recast him, redo everything.
Yeah. From a team perspective, you kind of get a sense on which things are going to be really volatile and that you probably want to push off till later, because if you work on it now, it might change. Larger themes don't tend to change too much, meaning we knew we were in Rapture, we knew we had Big Daddies, we knew we had Little Sisters, we knew we had Splicers, we knew what the arc of the story was about Jack coming into Rapture, and the specifics of this radiolog versus that radiolog didn't really affect anyone outside the audio team at that time, because we could still build the environment. We still knew what the environment was. We still knew what the animations were. There are areas you learn just by working in the same space for a while that this scene, I'm not touching this yet because I know that it's going to get changed a lot. I think these themes are pretty nailed down, so I'm going to focus the team on getting these things done.
I won't leave you twisting in the wind. We're going to need to draw out of hiding, but you're going to have to trust me.
The audio logs were, a great part of the game, and something that if you're a true fan, people really go in and listen to those and piece that all together. But I imagine there's a lot of work that goes into deciding, well, this is better for an audio log versus game dialogue, and there's the act of sort of cutting back and sort of saying, we need to be clear about what the narrative is for the game. What was that process like? The audio logs, were there things you added at the end, or were those, ideas that you had for the game, but then said, hey, maybe we'd demote these a little bit and make them audio logs?
As Sean was saying, there's sort of a hierarchy of expense that you have to face, and so any ideas you have to get across, especially as you start playing the game, you realize, well, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. You have to figure out how you can introduce that idea. And generally, as the train is moving, you try to think of cheaper and cheaper ways to get those ideas across. It's less important, it goes to an audio log. If it's less important, it goes to a poster on the wall.
Well, there's also characters that you can bring in that have audio logs that aren't, Atlas, Tenenbaum, those are your big ones. You can bring in somebody to do a short, a few different audio logs. It's a character that some players may not even find, but
right.
It adds a little bit of depth to Rapture.
And it also, usually each character generally is about a certain idea, and we don't just sort of come up with characters, we have an idea problem that we need to solve, and so let's introduce a character who's this guy, and he will be the guy who sort of shepherds you through that idea.
Julie, my dear, I am trying to run a business here. You want to spend time with my honeybees? Well, I'm going to have to start charging you for the pleasure. If I come out one more time and find you lolling out there amongst my hives, I'm grabbing my shotgun. As to your question, yes, my days in beekeeping school are a blur. But I do seem to remember something about that enzyme you keep blabbing on about.
So as you're going through the game and, writing things, rewriting things, were there things with the original BioShock that you've always been surprised that more people didn't pick up on, or was there something that, a connection to a character you thought was really going to resonate with people which, didn't? Anything like that?
No, it's the opposite. I was amazed, I don't know how you felt, but I was amazed how many people connected to the Would You Kindly stuff. Because I think it was when I wrote that speech, I don't think anybody on the team was like, oh my God, this is really this or that. And I don't think I really had any sense that people were going to connect to it. I think we ended up sort of over time finding more ways to support the notion throughout the game.
Yep.
And I don't think I really, until I heard Pat put together the revelation moment, where it's where you had all the bits that Atlas had said to you in the past building up, and then there was a visual that went along with that. That's when I realized it was going to be a really powerful moment. But even so, I still did I think people were really going to connect to it or really even understand it? Because it's pretty out there. And that it was meta commentary, too. I think that completely, I think I thought oh, it's kind of meta, cool. But people connected to it in a much bigger way.
Yeah, the choice and age and everything, and also just, being able to kind of roll back and think of all those other moments throughout the game. And so, a great revelation like that, they're few and far between in games where you sort of then you want to play it again, you're just oh wow, really, that does all make sense, right?
Yeah, I think as a team, we were definitely proud of what we had done. But up till that point, SWAT 4 was the biggest game that we worked on, and we had no expectation of that anybody would pick this up. Or even BioShock cosplay. I remember the first cosplay I saw with a guy in the Big Daddy suit, and his little daughter was in the kitchen cabinet. I think that was the first one I saw. I was like, whoa, people know this stuff, that's insane.
Yeah, people were building these outfits, and that only expanded with Infinite. I mean, that sort of went crazy with Infinite, with people cosplaying Elizabeth and Luteces and Booker. It meant a lot to people, and I don't think that's something we ever saw coming, and we're deeply grateful for it, because it's one thing to make a game and get good reviews and stuff like that. It's another thing to have things that people are having their weddings themed around it, and their tattoos and naming their children after characters. You can't plan for that, and I think the only way that could happen is if you just make something that you're deeply in love with and passionate about. I can say we were. It was something there's a lot of passion on the team about, but we didn't know people were going to take away what they did.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Part of the challenge with that, though, is when people love fiction so much and they dive into every word written in every audio log and try and connect all the fiction, make sure it all makes sense. Are there any things from that game that you sort of look back and say, like, oh wow, like we didn't explain this and we should have, or things that fans have misinterpreted over the years?
There are things we think that we did that should have or shouldn't have been in the game. Like I was never a fan of having two endings, and I think
that's what the publisher was asking you to sort of have a.
That was the one thing that 2K, and they were very hands off. That was the one thing they insisted on, and it's not something I really thought was a good idea, because they're still limited, even though they're multiple. They're still limited, and so that was something that we ended up doing. One of the endings was far better than the other one. I mean, there's no. It's clear that I was much more interested in the happier ending with the little sisters than I was with the nuclear submarine ending.
I'm sure part of it was the idea that if this game is, if you're making a choice throughout it, I'm sure when some people are like, oh well, then it has to be a payoff, right?
Right. Except the game was really about lack
of
choice.
Yeah,
About not being a choice. So that always struck me as a tension that was weird. But look, at the end of the day, they were putting up a lot of money, and so I can't really complain. They weren't dictatorial at all during the development. So that was the one thing. But that's a game that I wouldn't have put the boss battle in, the final boss battle. Like we seem to end up doing that over and over and over again. Every time we start a project, I'm like, I'm never going to do that again. We're never going to do that again, and we end up doing it.
Right.
We're not good at boss battles, and that you're fighting that guy, and look, this is the naked dude. It just doesn't work.
Totally makes sense.
And it works pretty well up till then, but then it doesn't. It just doesn't work. That boss battle's silly.